who's the Dark Alliance with?
The Dark Alliance referred to the allegiance between these Contra drug traffickers and the gangs of Los Angeles. And the one thing that's important, and a lot of people don't recall because this is ancient history, you know, it happened 15 years ago, was that the Contras were a creation of the CIA. The fact that the Mercury News backed off the story, I mean, I had worked a year on this. I had been an investigative reporter for them for 9 years, done a lot of major investigations for them, and, you know, I had a very good reputation at that newspaper. The fact that they would back off the series because they were being criticized by other newspapers, I found very disheartening. And then I was taken off the story when I believed the story had only been half told. So one of the reasons I quit was to write this book and finish telling the story, because I think this is an important part of our history that had been denied us for a long time.
The book is called Dark Alliance by Gary Webb. It is published by 7 Stories Press in New York.
That was the strange part about it, is that we laid out a series based on a year of investigation that had buku government documents. Most of the series is based on government documents, DEA reports, FBI reports, the testimony of government witnesses. And the other papers came back with unnamed sources, mostly unnamed government sources, saying, well, this couldn't be, we don't believe it, these drug traffickers weren't as significant as Webb made out. And that was it. And at that point, the series was viewed as discredited because unnamed government sources told the Washington Post that they didn't believe it. So, you know, I think this is an interesting lesson for the press. Investigating covert CIA operations, investigating the CIA in general, is now off limits to the press, unless you have what Ted Turner called proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which, when you're talking about covert operations, you're never going to find as a journalist.
What are you doing these days?
I'm working for the California legislature investigating government agencies. I work for the Task Force on Government Oversight.
Could you see yourself working for a newspaper again?
I liked writing the book real well. I would like to keep writing books.
Back to your call. Well, good morning.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to talk about the Swiss banking settlement, and I think that's great that they finally owed up to their mistakes, but I'd like to see our politicians put pressure on the Swiss banks to quit being the bankers for the international terrorist and drug dealers. Supposedly this guy that blew up the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania is some billionaire from Saudi Arabia. I wonder where that guy keeps his money, probably in the Cayman Islands or Swiss or the whole host of these other banks, and I wish there was some pressure on to clean up the banking system. All these terrorists and drug dealers wouldn't have any place to put their money.
There's a story on the front page below the fold in the Washington edition of the LA Times that profiles the Saudi dissident who you referred to, Hosami bin Laden. He is, his father had 52 children from a number of different wives. He is worth several $100 million, according to Robin Wright, who wrote the piece for the LA Times. And she profiles how he turned against the Americans essentially as a result of Operation Desert Storm in 1990.
Well, you know, there was a very interesting book written a couple of years ago by a journalist named Jonathan Whitney. It was called Endless Enemies. And his theory was that the United States foreign policy simply creates enemies wherever we go. And I think this is another example. When we intervene in the affairs of other countries and we shoot at people and people get shot at with American bullets and American weapons, we create enemies. And if this is true, that this man turned against the United States government as a result of Desert Storm, we've created another enemy there we might not have had before.
Items here on your pipeline chart. It says in the late 1980s, Colombian cocaine was flown aboard private planes into small airfields in northern Costa Rica and southern Nicaragua. Super DC-3s leaving from San Jose, Costa Rica, loaded with general merchandise, would touch down briefly, take on a cocaine load, and continue on to U.S. airports.
Right. That came out of the trial down in Nicaragua. Norwin Meneses, the guy who was running this drug ring.
Thanks. Springfield, Missouri, you're next.
Yeah, Brian, I'm really disappointed in you. The whole theme of this is that the CIA was bringing or was supplying the Contras with guns and financing it off of drugs. That's the theme.
Pardon?
No names.
Well, where do you want me to start?
Well, start.
Norwin Manassas, the guy who was running this drug ring. Norwin Manassas, the guy who was running this drug ring. You've got
And give us
Sergeant
the
Tom
story.
Gordon, who filed an affidavit in Los Angeles in 1986.
Hold.
Huh?
Was I correct on the theme? I don't know. I'm disappointed in Brian. He puts experts on for scandals puts on these stupid '80s scandals. Still, I mean, he's back in the past.
Hold on just a second.
Well, I tell you, I don't
Gary
think
Webb.
that community in Los Angeles thinks it's a stupid scandal.
Let me just tell the caller why this gentleman's on here. It's because caller after caller kept calling up and referring to this whole subject. I don't blame you for being upset. We can't deal with this thing in 15 minutes.
You bowed to somebody's pressure.
We didn't bow to anybody's
let
pressure.
The calls come as they come.
We did. Gary Webb, you want to talk some more about your sources on this thing? And who will not talk? Who just absolutely won't talk?
We filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the CIA, and as I said, those were denied on national security grounds. We filed them with the DEA, and for the first time in my life, I think, the DEA came out and said, no, we don't want to give you any records because we're concerned about invading the privacy of these drug dealers, so we don't want to tell you about them. So they didn't give us anything. The FBI sent me a letter saying it might be 2 years before they got around to answering my request. The INS has never responded. The State Department has gotten the stuff and never responded. I mean, these have been filed for like 6-8 months. And then we tried asking the DEA questions, and we couldn't get any answer from them. The only thing the CIA says is it's ludicrous, which, you know, I'll be the first to agree. The idea of them selling drugs to the Contras, for the Contras, the Crips, is ludicrous. But everything we saw said it was true.
Let's grab a call from Dayton, Ohio. Go ahead, please.
Hi. The one question that no one's asked yet, and I'm going to ask it and see if this guy gives us an honest answer. Were these drugs targeted to black people?
I don't think they were targeted like in the manner that you mean. They were targeted insofar as, you know, Danilo Blandone, the man who was sent to Los Angeles to sell these drugs. He had a master's degree in marketing. That was his job before the revolution. He was in charge of setting up wholesale markets for Nicaraguan agricultural produce. What happened, apparently, was, you know, the guy's a marketing expert. He looked around, he saw where it wasn't being sold, and went to sell it there.
Let me bring in the Mena, Arkansas story that the Wall Street Journal spent a lot of time on. How does that fit in with all this? I mean,
Mena was part of a parallel operation that was going on the East Coast, which is why if people think they've heard about this before, it's because they heard about the East Coast pipeline when it was uncovered back in '85 and '86.
But I want to make the connection with the current president. He was supposedly involved as a governor?
Well, he was governor while this was going on. Whether or not he knew about it is something I don't think has been proven yet.
Let me ask you, are you alleging in any of this that the Republicans had anything to do with this as a party?
No, I mean, I tried to stay as far out of partisan politics on this story as I could, just tell a story about a drug operation. You know, we mentioned obviously that Reagan was in power when he authorized this secret war down there. But, you know, Clinton's in power now, and those are the folks who put Danilo Blandone on the federal payroll. I mean, the guy that brought crack to L.A. is now a federal government employee.
Ever since 1986, Bill Clinton, as governor, did not ride herd on this thing. But all the drugs came through Mena, Arkansas. Everybody knows that and reads it in the papers. Barry Seal was doing it. Barry Seal was killed. Clinton didn't really have anything to do with it except he knew about it, gave auspice to it, rode herd on it, and his government bond program received 10% of the profits, plus all the money was able to be laundered through Arkansas banks.
All right, thanks. Mr. Webb.
That's a lot of the allegations around Mena, and a lot of what she said is true. That Barry Seal was, I mean, he was one of the biggest drug dealers in the country at the time, and that's where he was based out of.
Freedom of Information Act, has it made any difference?
The one we had that worked, which, I mean, sort of cemented the story for us, was the Freedom of Information Act that we filed with the National Archives. And those folks over there released some FBI documents that had been classified for about 10 years regarding regarding this drug ring and regarding this operation, and we got them out of the files of Iran-Contra Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh. I mean, these are some of the FBI reports that were done either prior to the Walsh investigation as part of something else or as part of the Walsh investigation.
Let's go to Newport, Rhode Island next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webb, this is a very interesting conversation. You should also check at the National Archives the recently released documents on the Board of Economic Warfare from World War II, which was founded by William Casey, who was a part of the old OSS.
Yeah.
And they began by purchasing the first crop of opium that they purchased. The entire crop from Turkey was 1943. Lucky Luciano was deported to Naples after he helped with the invasion of Sicily. Luciano began his heroin trafficking from Turkey through Naples, Sicily, and Cuba.
This is all in those files?
Yeah. No, the preemptive buys, what the Board of Economic Warfare was about. The reason why I'm interested in it is some characters in your part of the country were on the Board of Economic Warfare. So it's been going on for a long, long time. And then, of course, it's a logical thing that Casey would be involved in this type of operation in the 1980s.
Thanks. Mr.
Well, it sounds like Gary's got himself another story there.
I got.
Or if somebody doesn't, I was going to say if somebody doesn't beat you to it, Gary. But it did sound interesting what she said.
Now, this isn't the best way to get a story.
Right.
Well, you know, when you sit and listen to everybody on this thing, you start to hear all the conspiracy theories.
Well,
have they come to you in a big way? I mean, you find people coming out of the woodwork.
I mean, the thing that gave us the sort of intestinal fortitude to do this, because we realize this is a very controversial story. This is like almost impossible to believe when you look at it. But we've got this tool now called the World Wide Web, where you can show people the documents you used. I mean, you can click on you can read the story, and if it says set a report, you can click on the word report and actually read the report. If we've got a quote in there and it's highlighted, you can hear what these folks said. So, make up your own minds. Don't take my word for it. Nobody knows who I am.
Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Morning.
Hey, it's a thrill to get through to you guys. One of the things that had caught my interest was when you showed his chart. I couldn't read the chart well enough to know if the area down there around the Gulf included Mena, Arkansas or not. This Mena, Arkansas thing has been going on. That accusation's been made now ever since Clinton came into office, especially tying him and Don Lassiter and the other gentleman that was supposedly the head man in that part of the country. So it may all tie together,
We've talked about it, and I'll let Mr. Webb answer you. Go ahead.
Actually, to give you a bit of background, I mean, Mena just became an issue since Clinton became president, but the information has been available since the Kerry Committee did its investigation back in '87 and '88. A lot of what I know about Mena came from reading the report, reading the report of that investigation. As I said, they were on to this East Coast Contra pipeline, which they exposed pretty well. For some reason, that report just never had any resonance with the media. Deutsch has asked for an investigation from the CIA Inspector General, and Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein have both asked for investigations on that. So there's a number of investigations going on in Washington that we're going to be following.
Gary Webb, 5 a.m. out there. Thanks a lot for getting up and telling us about this.
Sure, glad to be here.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch.
Deutsch has asked for an investigation.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.